This is from Ian T. Braden. How do I approach my DPT professors about updating the curriculum? This is a really good one. And there's actually several threads in the student section of the Clinical Athlete Forum on this very topic. It's a slippery slope. I'm going to say this, especially with my experience anecdotally, the professors who are deeper in their experience, more years under their belt, and especially those who don't practice anymore, maybe are potentially a little less open to change and a little bit less open to being questioned. And so there's ego. Everybody's got an ego and everybody's got a bias, and there is a way to push a professor's buttons that you're not going to get what you want out of it. So an example of like the tone of the professors in front of an entire class of 50 physiotherapy students, and then you jump up and it's like, well, I don't know about that because blah, blah, blah. And you start citing literature that the professor obviously hasn't had a chance to read. And so it comes off as an attack. And maybe the professor doesn't get defensive, but maybe they just blow off your question. And maybe they, try to deal with it the best they can. They're very, very nice about it. You're probably not going to get the answer that you want anyway. And it's going to lead to more frustration on your end, and then potentially this kind of like invisible wall between you and professor. Like, that's probably not the way that you want to approach it right from the jump. If you do ask the question in front of everyone, you want to literally pose it as a question and be respectful and have an inquisitive tone and actually be looking for an answer, as opposed to like already in your head, you're really just asking the question to let them know that you think what is being talked about is bullshit. Because I've had that feeling, but then again, like, what are you really searching for? You're just patting your own ego at that point. So my general recommendation is get the professor outside of class, after class, go to their office hours, shoot them an email to set up a meeting, and then come to them and then brief the professor on the meeting. So if you set up a meeting via email, or you get them after class and you say, can I talk to you about a so-and-so subject? Like, brief them on what you're going to talk about. Lay down some bullet points, just some quick questions regarding how you feel or what you think on a certain topic versus what's being taught. And then have a little bit of literature to back it up, like, cite what you're talking about, but give them the chance to go over those references as well. So don't just surprise people. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't blindside, especially your professors. Don't blindside them. Because you want them on your side. Ultimately, they still know more than you. That's the way that I would go about it, and I would still do so in a very inquisitive way. So you're looking for more questions, essentially. Like, that should be. You're not going to a meeting like that and looking for answers and looking for a curriculum change. You're going in there for the professor to explain kind of their rationale, and then the program's rationale, and ultimately for you maybe to form better questions to continue to push. That's one thing. That's a one-time thing. You should do that throughout the entirety of your physical therapy career, not just school, but even those 3 years in school. You're always bringing this up, like, and then your other schoolmates, other classmates, you can have these conversations with as well. Hey, check this out. I met with so-and-so. Look at this, blah, blah, blah. We talked about this and might need updating. Like, if you start getting other members of your class to think as well, they'll bring things up in a respectful manner, and then the professors will start to talk too. So it becomes this kind of snowball effect. Rather than trying to be that one picketer and just like in one instant you want to change the world and turn the curriculum upside down, you're probably not going to make friends that way. So just be careful and tactful with how you do it, and be respectful with how you do it. But I think it can be done, and I think it should be done. Jared, what do you think?
Yeah, totally in agreement. This is rule number one: just don't be a dick. It really should inform everything. And so I want to kind of chime in and illustrate what Quinn was saying here with an example. So I'm going to shout out one person, and before I get into it, just if I were to shout out the number or all the people who came to mind as exemplifying what we've been talking about, it would be too long. I couldn't do it. So just know that's a thing, and that I'm really, really encouraged by the number of people and groups that are pushing for this very thing, for reform and for updating of curricula. And doing it in a way that is likely to get those changes faster, and they're doing it by not being a dick, but also by not being passive. So people that come to mind, or groups, things, people like the Level Up Initiative, Clinical Athlete. So anyway, but Mel Hudson, little Instagram plug, Oreos and Squats, if you want to check her out. She helps us out with some things here. I've spoken to her about how she's a physical therapy student, and how it's really tough going through the curriculum when there is still outdated information and narratives that aren't supported and are probably nocebic in nature and that sort of thing. And you have to learn these things and other information that's probably not super useful, based on how one thinks they're going to practice once they're out of school, but you still need to know that so you can pass your boards and then become an actual physical therapist. So it's difficult to go through and to like just force yourself to learn it, even though you dislike every moment of that process. And she had asked me, what was my experience like? I didn't know enough, so I had the bliss of ignorance that way. And I can think of a couple of people in our class who, at the time, I thought they were just well beyond me, and they may very well have been in terms of intelligence, and they would ask good, intelligent questions that would kind of challenge in a very respectful way what we were covering in class. But I don't think anybody ever crossed the line. And then getting out of school, starting to do more research and stuff like that, I realized like, oh, I understand now why these questions were being raised. So I didn't have to deal with it, which makes me all that much more appreciative of people who are doing what you said, Quinn, in terms of trying to talk to professors and ask good questions for the sake of getting the answer, not having that preconceived answer already locked in and going for that gotcha or I'm right, you're wrong sort of moment, whether externally or internally. So Mel has been doing this. She's been sending articles to professors, asking permission, like, hey, I found this thing. Would you like to read it? I think this is relevant to what we're calling or reading or learning in class. And I think it's starting to yield fruit in that even though the curriculum is not being spun on its head and it's not being completely revamped because she's, kind of pushed for it. She's had some productive conversations with professors. She's been asked to create I think it's a bank of videos for exercises to create a bit of a strength and conditioning component for the curriculum. Things that sort of thing hasn't been done before for that school. So that's real progress, and I think that it's one example of what's, again, already happening and what can continue to happen and in greater numbers internationally, provided that we push for it, but again, in a reasonable, respectful way.
Yeah, I think people start to come around. Like if as long as you're as long as you're consistent and your tone doesn't change, I kind of liken it to patient education. Like if people are going to ask you if you think you've got the perfect plan, you've educated the patient, and they're like, yeah, it makes total sense, and then like a week later they come back and they're like, what was that thing you said again? And I was like, that was the thing, that was the most important, that was one thing that you had to remember. You know what I mean? It's just like you get frustrated, and then as long as your tone doesn't change though, like you keep repeating the same, be okay with repeating yourself over and over and over and over again. Say it like you said it the first time. I think the same can be said when you're trying to kind of push the envelope a little bit in situations like this, be it your classmates or your professors. Don't get frustrated because they're not listening to you or because they're just not getting what you're getting. They've got to go through the same, like if they're just not, I think people, if you're just not ready to listen, you're not ready to listen. There was a period of time in my career and my student life and where there were just some notions that I wasn't ready to hear about. And I think back on it now, and it's frustrating because there were other people involved, like patients and clients, and I was lucky enough to have it repeated to me over and over and over, and finally it just clicked. So you just got to keep that in mind. Just don't get frustrated. I was looking up. I'm sorry if you guys heard me typing in the background. I thought I muted myself, but I didn't. I was trying to look up. Benjamin Franklin had a group. I don't know. I'm going back. I'm going way back.
Man,
it was a mutual improvement club, and they met once a week. The name of which I'll get here in a second. Oh, it's called Junto, Junto. It was Ben Franklin's Junto group, and it was 10 people or 11 people, I think, in the town, and it was a mutual improvement club. So they'd meet once a week. The spirit, though, their kind of philosophy was what I wanted to read. They met in the spirit of inquiry after truth, without fondness of dispute or desire of victory. And I think that last part is key. Without fondness of dispute. So if you're just a contrarian and you're going in looking for a fight, then you're part of the problem. And you see this in internet debate all the time. On Facebook, let's say I'm having a discussion with somebody, or you having a discussion with somebody, and you link a couple papers, and you're like, hey, check these out, in a very respectful way. And then what does that person do? Comes back in 3 seconds and says, oh, okay, great, but what about bam, bam, bam? Obviously, that other person didn't read the discussion or didn't read the papers, and it's just like, in that same person, when asked to take it to like a private forum or via email, crickets. Because it seems like I think people are just more apt to, hey, look at me in this public forum having this discussion. I'm so smart, but yet don't actually want to learn about the topic. So I'm going to read that again because I love it. In the sincere spirit of inquiry after truth, without fondness of dispute or desire of victory. So you shouldn't, who cares who wins? Nobody wins. We all win if we're learning. So I just thought that was relevant, and it was something I just read about, so I was excited to share.
You were eager to pass on what you had learned.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's great, though. I think it's really cool that was Benjamin Franklin's group. If he was, thinking a little further ahead, he could have marketed that as a masterclass. But
Totally.
I think that one quality that I really admire amongst not just clinicians but scientists in general, or we'll stick with scientists, is this understanding that there's a hell of a lot that we don't know. And I think that people who know a lot recognize probably more readily what they don't know, or that they don't know a lot. And there's typically a better sense of, I'm speaking generally here again, humility and willingness to ask questions for the sake of getting an answer, and to learn more about, maybe something that they didn't know about, or at least where someone else is coming from, because it happens enough where two people start off thinking they're saying different things, but really they're saying the same thing or agree on a core principle. And then, after a couple of exchanges, they realize, oh, we're actually thinking the same thing. So approaching things in that spirit of humility and honesty is important.
I love it. I think that's a great place to stop.